I don't know, said original Red Rascals now they are telling you for lock in and tune in. Cause right now you're listening to the Wear the Crown with Rasta Rani and Blood Pressure. Make sure you lock in, seeing Rasta people are chat to you. 10 pound of weed in our chariot. And yes, that's straight from west we are carry that. And when it's sealed up tight, you can't smell that. And yes, that's straight down a town Rani sell that. I don't know, so this is case now representing for Rasta Rani, yeah. Wear the crown, lock in, tune in, don't miss a thing. And make sure you listen to the king. You hear that? Rasta said that.
Whoa, 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 whoa. Well, this is Corafire representing for Wear the Crown podcast, understand, hosted by Rasta Rani and Blood Pressure. Seeing? Every time, Corafire representing. Big up on yourself.
Kaboom.
Yes, I. Love
Big
and
up
respect.
everybody tuning in.
Yeah, man. Give thanks. Wear the Crown, featuring myself, Rasta Rani, and my man, Blood Pressure.
Yes, I big up Rasta Rani.
Yeah, man. I got a good friend of mine, great guest on today, my man, Matt Marshall. I can honestly say that this man is I've been mentoring under, like, to as far as cannabis goes and growing. It's the one brethren that I can say that's taught me a lot about growing herb. And I'm so honored to have him on today. Yeah, man, and to talk about kind of his journey and what's been good. What's up, my brother?
Not much, man. Just very humbled and blessed to be here today. You know, it's been a long journey, my friend.
Yeah,
and,
yeah.
Really, really excited to share it with everybody. And, you know, it's crazy how things come full circle.
Yeah, man.
And, you know, a lot of this started just about a block away with you and I, and then started a few blocks away with Thomas and I back in the day, throwing parties at Funky Buddha. So,
Right.
Yeah, it's a long journey, man. And,
Yeah, man.
Just feel blessed.
That's crazy to think about, that we were like literally catty corner, less than a stone's throw away from here to be able to grow weed, you know, with native roots and everything. It's just right down the street. Yeah, and that's kind of like our background. How I met Matt is I was doing the solventless hash at Native Roots and doing the whole Rasta bubble thing. And Matt was the grower that would come to me, and the one guy who would communicate with me as on the grow team that would be like, "Yo, what's up, man? Good morning. How you doing?" And actually, like, have a conversation with me, and like we would just reason a lot of the time, you know, talking about life and stuff. And then also he'd, you know, inform me like, "Yo, man, stay away from these plants. Stay away from these strains. This is going on with this plant. You don't want this because this is going on." So as a hash maker, it was such a crucial link, I felt, with having that information, you know, because when you're dealing with a company, if you're the guy, and this is the thing when it comes to hash, most guys that do hash aren't really knowledgeable growers. They're more or less somebody that has mastered the art of extractions, and that's what they put all their eggs into that basket. And versus like someone who's well-rounded that knows on the extraction side, that can go in and do the process 100% and just as much do that in the grow side. There's very rare people that can cross over, and that's what I've learned in this industry. So to have that information, to have Matt around to kind of relay that information to me was crucial, and something I've always advocated for when I work at facilities is like, yeah, man, if we do hash or we're going to, I need to have access to the grower and talk to them and know what's going on. And everyone that I've worked for the most part, that I've done extractions, has been open to that. Not necessarily practicing, but open to it. You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
But yeah, brother. So I guess the best way to inform people who you are and is like kind of in a short little brief explain your elevation of like what you've done, and then you can go into how you got started and all that stuff.
Yeah, brother, for sure. Like you said, been doing this for a long time. So actually started under a caregiver model, growing for my cousin, who's a chronic pain patient, and really that evolved into just getting more patients from his pain doctor. Eventually 2008 came. Obama said, "I won't raid you if you open a store." And I was like, dude, I got patients, I got a doctor, they're like, I got supply, all I need is a landlord. And so we were open the next week. We opened up Rockbrook Inc., which was probably one of the first stores here in Denver, really focused on the medical high-grade side of things. Definitely big up to Robert Melamede and Adam Pasquale and my homeboy Dolo.
Okay, that's what's up.
Definitely put that together back in the day. that was ultimately how I met Thomas. We started throwing parties at Funky Buddha because I noticed that nobody was really plugged into the Rasta reggae scene, and the culture at the time was still quiet and kind of unsure, but the love and the community here, especially through all the Rastas, was thick, man. And
Nice.
I really felt that vibe, and I wanted to use that to not only promote the ganja that we were growing, but the positivity and the unity that existed here in Denver. And big up to my man Blood Pressure for helping
Yes,
to put
I.
that together.
Yeah, man.
Yes, I. Same
And,
way,
uh,
brother. Thank you.
Yeah, for sure. Really, that just evolved into me finding MJardin group. Grew with them for quite some time. Was head grower for Native Roots.
Yep.
Put together their training and auditing program, and then left as the COO of Canadian operations as they scaled and went public into Canada. And
Yes.
have really been focused the last couple of years of my career in Canada and working with publicly traded cannabis companies, helping them develop large facilities, and mainly for First Nations groups. So really helping to do that and train people indigenous to that land, and helping them to provide jobs and grow ganja as a career and as a tool. They have a lot of the same problems that we have here in terms of alcoholism and drug abuse and poverty and things like that on their land. And so I view it as a really, really blessed opportunity to be able to go up there and, teach them how to grow ganja as a life skill.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome, man. And that's why I would, to look up to you and have you as a mentor to look up to as far as all the accomplishments within the weed business is from knowing that grassroots organic grower who appreciates the herb for medicine for what it is, to be able to scale it up and bring that into the cannabis world as far as the industry grows. There's very few people that hold that standard and keep that standard. You can be fortunate to find some owners that believe in it, but how long will it take until they actually convert to where we're just going to go with this model of that's cheaper and more efficient and brings dollars in. So, bless up to you, bro, and what you do. And I really admire all the leaps and bounds. I've learned a lot, as far as, how to prune my plants to exactly, what's going on in Canada with, the indigenous people and even with the whole schooling of with the, them building trade schools and things like that.
It's really interesting, man. It's a different ballgame because obviously up there, cannabis is federally legal. And so, I've been able to hold job fairs at universities, things that you cannot do here in the States because those universities, unless they're private, will get their funding pulled. But up there, they welcome you with open arms, and that you have a booth alongside everybody else who's trying to hire people that are graduating that year.
Wow.
So it's really cool, you can target those big horticulture universities, and you can really pull out some high level people, which is great. And just the access to be able to work not only on hiring with those universities, but also in partnership for studies with those universities.
Now you're saying hiring, and you have a booth and you're at the university. Now these are skilled workers that have hands-on experience, or is this more like they're coming off of book smarts and open to this new industry, basically?
Exactly. They're coming off of book smarts. They're open to this new industry. Specifically the facility that I'm concentrated on right now is really remote in an area of Saskatchewan. And so there's not a lot of people there in general. And so, really what we're focused on is trying to pull those students out of that local agriculture school and say, hey, this is a viable option for you. And this is a new up and coming crop in Canada. And this is something that, while growing corn and things like that is cool, when you're 20 years old, it holds some notoriety to say I work in a cannabis facility and I'm getting it on the ground level, and I'm able to work my way through this over the next, decade or whatever the time period is. Cannabis is also a really complicated crop that a lot of people kind of take for granted. And so for those, bioag students and people like that, that challenge is real for them, and they really tend to enjoy that. So.
That challenge is inviting, where it motivates them to kind of deal with it. And,
exactly.
I've met a lot of people that I feel like have come out of a whole horticultural background and schooling, and that are super passionate and people about plants and It's just when you start to deal with people in general, like egos can get involved and things like that.
Yeah, that's always the balance, right? Like scientists are scientists for a reason, and typically they're not always the greatest people in terms of management and communication and things like that. And really, to your point, I mean, that's ultimately how you hold that vibe and how you hold that culture in your facility, whether it's a cultivation facility, an extraction facility, whatever that is, I feel is crucial. I mean, I know that there's numerous times throughout the years that we were at Native Roots together where you would see how my plants reacted just based on the dynamic of what was going on with my team.
Oh yeah.
And those plants react and absorb that, and so you as a manager have a higher level responsibility to make sure that you're managing not only your plants but your team, because those plants are going to reflect that vibe. So.
Yeah, exactly. I've definitely ran into that as of recent, where I found myself, dealing with the owner, and I'm in charge of the garden, and the guys that I'm working with are like slacking and not taking it as serious as I am. I guess I thought we were all on the same level of passion and commitment, and trying to dot all the I's and cross all the T's, and it's like, oh no, dude, we're dotting some I's and we've crossed a couple T's, but you know what I mean? And you're like, whoa, bro, that's not good. Yeah. And somebody's got to answer for that. Yep. And so yeah, it's an interesting. That's what I've learned now. Like, because I coming from the hashing background and extraction background, is like you're really dealing with data. You're dealing with numbers. You're figuring out what does what because it's giving you this amount. You've got a process that you do that is supposed to be repeated.
Exactly.
The one quote that I stole, and I won't name any names, but I took this reference, and this quote, which I thought was the greatest, was like, if I was a guy who was making orange juice, and you handed me a box of oranges, and you was like, hey man, I want you to make some orange juice out of these oranges. And I do the same process that I do 100 times over for like anybody else's oranges. This is it's not a special process for you. It's not a special process for him. It's the same process over and over. And I squeeze out that orange juice. If there's something wrong with the orange juice, we're going to have to go talk to the guy who grew the oranges.
Yeah.
Because this process is like a machine. There's no changing it. You know what I mean? So like, I can tell when something's good. I can tell when something's bad. Yeah. And or if something's going on that's abnormal. And so you have to be able to trust the person. So if the guy, same thing. If you go to the guy and the guy who just squeezes out the milk and can tell you, hey, this milk's good and this one's bad, you can't really get mad at him for squeezing out bad milk. It's coming from whatever the cow's eating, whatever they're doing with with how they're feeding it and all that stuff.
It's a problem with production, right? Not a problem with how you're manufacturing it or processing it. And that's something that I feel, to your point, is even much more true with solventless extraction, because obviously with solventless, it's a mechanical removal of those trichrome heads using agitation in some facet, whether it's dry sift or bubble or whatever it is, right? And so that's a true representation of that plant material.
Yes.
And so, it's different than using a solvent-based extraction method where you're using a solvent to just strip everything off of it.
Yeah.
So definitely, to your point, being able to walk rooms, being able to, know and have conversations around like how these are going to wash based on, how the plants grew, how they reacted. Maybe they had a later soap and oil application to them because there was some sort of IPM flare up. Like those are all things that are going to come out in your wash. And so those are, that was a big part of us walking rooms together, especially at scale. I mean, we were pulling down, probably a couple 100 pounds every like 6 days from just that facility.
Yeah, and I think the one thing that working with you and the other guys was that there was accountability. You guys had like the audit, and you had to be accountable for those type of things, and someone was coming in and checking to be like, okay, have you done this? Have you done these? All these standard practices. Totally. Because I think when you deal with growers, there's a lot of different standard practices. Yeah. You're dealing with each grower's standard practice. If this guy likes to leave a pile of dirt over here with his tools, and this guy's like, no, I like my tools on the shelf. These are all different standard practices that no one attributes to, and then you've got all these guys doing different stuff.
Yeah, man, and that's definitely one thing that I feel I've developed a real skill for over the years, and definitely I have a lot of friends who and I as well come from humble beginnings in the cannabis industry, and so. But I have a lot of friends that are like, man, you know how much money I made doing it this way? Or, like, I've been doing it this way for 20 years. Like, I wouldn't stop now. Why would I do that?
Yeah, exactly.
And it's like, well, this is an evolution, man. Like, we're not growing the same paradise seed pack that we were growing back in 2005 with Cali Mist and Durgamata and Mango Haze and all that. It's like, if you grew all that now, people would laugh at you. Yeah. And so, like, you have to evolve with it. And
well, that's how in other countries that they're still evolving, because they're like, even now, I think I was looking, not even other countries, I guess you could call Vegas another country, but I was looking at something that they're advertising for a lot of the weed that's coming out, and it's literally stuff that was like 4 years. They're 4 years behind the gate. Like, all those strains that I saw were all strains that we grew like 4 years ago. And it's all because they're established strains that do produce numbers.
Exactly.
They're not, and we know that, but the wager we have to deal with here in Colorado is having what is relevant, what's popular, what's on the latest curve, because we like change, we like flavors. Versus, like, if you want to pump out like 100 pounds of whatever, you can find some of those strains to do that.
For sure, man. And to your point, like, I usually call those strains like stand up your facility strains, because you have a bunch of money dumped into this facility that you've been bleeding for quite some time, and you want to get as most bang for your buck as quick as possible. Yeah. And usually in that case, the market's not quite as mature, so they just want fire. They don't really care if it's the huge variety pack like we're talking about. That usually comes later in more mature markets, to your point. Yeah. And definitely, to back that up 1 second, like, it's not only Vegas, to your point, but it is, the East Coast markets that are up and coming. And then really it is other countries. Canada very much, and the reason that I mentioned that old school Paradise seed pack is because those are the most popular strains in Canada right now. Oh, wow. There's really not a lot of, the stuff that we all know and love that are all new, Monkey Mints and Gelato and Kush Mints and all this exotic stuff that exists here is not really a thing up there yet.
And now here those strains are like a legacy.
Exactly.
It's like that's the legacy of what has evolved into strains like you're describing.
For sure, absolutely.
But now you don't find those good legacy strains that you really like. Like, I can't find a good bubble gum,
right? An
Indiana bubble gum or a blueberry,
right?
Or like a single source, indica. There's a few around, but they tend to be being utilized for breeding.
Yes.
And not really being grown. Because it's not a very good looking plant.
Right.
It doesn't have really good jar appeal.
Yep.
But when you mix it with this, it fucking smells like,
Yeah.
It has that aroma. And so, it's interesting, the breeding that's going on in more evolved markets like Colorado.
Yeah.
The market demands it. People want, especially when you can breed plants together and make new ones.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the blueberry example is a prime example, because people hunt specifically for that blueberry terpene. I know, like, I have some seed packs at home of blueberry muffin from Humboldt Seeds, which is, kind of the new hot blueberry terpene strain. But then my boy Matt at Riot Seeds actually just came out with a bunch of blue bonnet crosses that he's been working on for a couple of years that have that same just like blueberry syrup, old school.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say.
Pancakes.
You're so right that you can't find a blueberry like that isn't crossed with something. Right. Like and I remember 5-6 years ago there was barely, you were like getting a lot of blueberry headband or something like blueberry something that was heady, but it was, you could tell it had been crossed.
It
wasn't like
it
that.
Wasn't some straight DJ Short blueberry.
Nah, DJ Short. And that's the thing, like moving to when I was on the Western Slope, everybody. If you asked anybody what they were growing, I'm growing some blueberries.
No doubt, bro.
All day long.
Yeah, dude, question.
8 week strain.
No question.
They didn't have to manage it, they handle it
it
much, and it just grew, and they chopped it down.
Yeah.
That's how they liked it.
Yeah, man.
Crazy.
Yeah, big up all my homies up in Summit County who originally put me on back in the day when I was hunting for someone to teach me how to grow cannabis to save my cousin. Those guys really put me on, and big up to them. And they created Blue River Blueberry, which is a real popular Colorado blueberry phenotype. So big up to all those guys for all their work and all they did.
Yeah, that's what's up, man.
Yeah, man.
Hell yeah. Yeah. So now, do you, as you climbed the ladder with MJardin, and then was able to do make the network with the indigenous people of Canada to do work out there, and now you've branched off to do your own thing, is that right?
So currently, I currently am employed by Westleaf Cannabis, which is a publicly traded Canadian cannabis company. We actually just completed a merger with We Grow Cannabis yesterday, so really excited about that. These guys are some high-level growers from BC that have been around for quite some time, and have made a really good name for themselves for being truly a craft grower up in Canada. And
nice.
So we're really excited about this to bring on this new facility that I mentioned that's in northern Saskatchewan. It's in conjunction with the Thunderchild First Nations group. So excited to have plants in the building, hopefully, say, the first half of this year probably. It's about 100,000 square foot indoor purpose-built cultivation facility, and excited to.
So purpose-built, that's extractions and other things, or
it's built from the ground up specifically for the purpose of cultivation.
Okay.
And so the company does have actually a large extraction lab in Calgary. And they just got their license for that, so they're actively extracting product right now and doing business-to-business sales probably coming up here soon. So got the first products coming out from the extraction lab, and then Prairie Records is their dispensary brand.
Okay.
And it's actually a really cool concept, and something that we can all appreciate, kind of being hip hop heads and that sort of thing. And it's Prairie Records is modeled after a vintage record store concept.
Oh wow!
And so you go in and you flip through decks of records just like you do in a normal record store, but every record is a strain of cannabis. And so then you pull that record out and you're like, oh, this is the ice cream cake, and you have a little record cover with it. You turn it over on the back side and it tells you about the strain, the effects, the terpenes, the testing, those types of things.
Gotcha.
And that content is co-created with the LP or the licensed producer who's actually growing that product. And so that does a couple things. And so in Canada, you can't really display or advertise your cannabis. There's no real tactile shopping experience inside the dispensary.
So you mean how we have jars out and you're like, hey, can I see that jar? And they're like, yeah, check it out. And we grab it, hold it, we're poking it with a chopstick.
Yeah, they can have sample jars, but you definitely are restricted in how you can access that jar and how many jars are available to be on the floor at one time. And they're really restricted in the language that you can use on the recreational side. So you can't say anything remotely medical at all, or anything that could even be remotely construed as medical at all.
What do you mean?
If you were to walk in and say, hey, I'm looking for something because I have a headache.
Okay.
I would immediately have to say, I'm not allowed to discuss medical,
Whoa.
Yeah, I'm not a doctor. I can't discuss medical advice. But what I'm hearing from you is you had a long day. You probably want something to go home and help you relax. And you would be like, yeah. I'm like, okay, well, let me steer you more towards this section of the store.
Wow.
So you really have, and I spent a lot of time with them because I did all the retail training for everybody for the bud tenders and the launch of the stores. And I spent a lot of time really training people to repackage what people are coming in and saying because of exactly that reason. And so what the records really do is it gives them back that ability to say, what is the strain all about? Because you can't really tell me much about it. And so at least now I have a record cover. I can kind of go through the store in my own time and kind of learn about what these different strains are. And then I can come and ask questions if I want, or I can just take these record covers up to the desk and be like, hey, I want a gram of this, a pre-roll of this, an eighth of this, and I'm gone. And so that's been really helpful also for not only the customers who come in, but the bud tenders, because you can now have a middle ground with music to use that to repackage what they're saying when they come into the store. And so I can now say, this strain is going to be more like your get up and go in the morning. This is going to be more like your light jazz in the evening. This is going to be more like your middle of the day lunch break. Yeah. I just need 10 minutes to chill.
It's a visual cue as well as an informational cue to where both parties, the customer or the patient plus the bud tenders, informed without having to constantly train bud tenders on what to be saying.
I recommend scenarios to the customers. I ask them, do you want to paint the house or do you want to relax and watch a movie? Or, give them different scenarios to help them sort of identify what the potential effects will be.
Yeah, exactly. And that's really the way that you have to do it on the recreational side in Canada. The medical program in Canada all runs through the mail. And that kind of probably sounds like a trip to some people here in the US. But it's just like anything else. You have a website, or you have a portal for a licensed producer, or you have an 800 number you can call and talk to someone. You talk through it, you place your order, they put it in the mail, they send it to you. So.
And they're like you're a caregiver, like we would call here.
Yeah.
Do you have like a relationship with that person?
It's not usually a person, and it's typical. Well, in some cases it is a person. So let me back that up. There is a caregiver model that definitely exists in Canada that's actually more robust, more on the BC side as opposed to the eastern side. But the truer medical model, the scalable, licensed producer medical model that we're talking about, you're dealing with a company just like you would be dealing with a pharmaceutical company like Merck or whatever else the case may be. So.
Wow, but it's not Marinol or something like that.
It's
not.
Like straight. It's straight bud, or ganja. It's ganja. I mean, it's and they have a different variety of cultivars, and they have people on staff that'll explain the difference and the effects of that cultivar, but they'll explain it from a medical standpoint,
or like on a website.
Yeah, exactly.
And
like
you
through
go
their
there
website
and
portal.
That's where you can correspond with the
exactly
the characteristics of that plant and what it's recommended
for on a medical standpoint. Exactly. Wow. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Really efficient.
Yeah, it is super efficient, and it really allows people choice, and it allows you to really and typically how you find those licensed producers is the doctor who's recommending you for your medical license in Canada is giving you a list of licensed producers that have strains that would probably work for what you're looking for, whether that's a 1-to-1 CBD ratio or whatever it may be.
Your malady, glaucoma, or some form of cancer.
I was, judging the High Times thing, and I got CBD vapes. I know we talked about this prior, but the one thing I was really surprised was the 3-to-1 ratios and the 4-to-1 ratios. I didn't werealize that the ratios we're getting to, the evolution, I guess, of it all, of how it's getting to that point where we're figuring out like better ratios and things like that are getting dialed in more, because I did notice, it's still mild depending on who your product's coming from and what the start product was. But I did notice, like with those 3-to-1s, there was a little bit more of a like kick of the CBD, where I was like, the onset, I could feel it a little bit more so than with others. But that's interesting.
Yeah, I mean, I did some judging as well, and I ended up with CBD edibles, and so and thankfully so, because I suffer from anxiety, and so that actually really worked well for me, and I was able to find some products that I may not have tried otherwise, and so, but to your point, I think it's those ratios are important. Like, it's important to be able to kind of dial that in, and it's definitely made a huge effect for me personally in terms of like being able to control my anxiety with cannabis or CBD as opposed to having to go run and take a Xanax or something like that.
I know. What do you recommend for? Because I know that you do suffer with a little bit of anxiety, and I know that you grow or have grown in the past for family members. Yeah. And what strains would you recommend that you find
for sure
find are effective?
I've had really good luck with Canasu, which is a Cannatonic Sour Tsunami cross. Grew a lot of that here in town for quite some time, and that was just a great 2-to-1 ratio, and then sometimes 3-to-1 depending on how long you ran it and how long you could run it longer and kind of degrade that THC and get some more ancillary cannabinoids out of it. So it just kind of depends on how long you run it before you harvest it. But that was usually a great 2-to-1 or 3-to-1. So.
And what do you know about harvesting plants early for getting certain cannabinoids like CBG?
Yeah, definitely.
I've been kind of fascinated with that.
Yeah,
and wondering what you think about doing that and harvesting flowers early.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's definitely a couple reasons to harvest flowers early, depending on what you're shooting for. To your exact point, in the hemp game, it's actually really common to run a 45-day flower cycle, as opposed to what most people run in the cannabis industry is like a 60 to 70-day flower cycle typically. And it's for exactly what you were mentioning is, as you go on along in that growth cycle, there's potential for those cannabinoids to convert over to THC. And so typically in the hemp game, you're chopping at 45 days to make sure that just doesn't happen. There's also reasons behind it. Like you said, instead of those CBGs and CBNs and CBCs converting to THC, they stay as they are at that point. And so you tend to get more ancillary cannabinoids out of that product.
Yeah.
Same thing with in the solvent list when you harvest early.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
For certain cannabinoid you get more of a terpene profile because it's not as matured. The glands aren't mature enough that they're just basically taking on that terpene profile and it's still young. Yeah. And so they'll cut them early, and then that's also where you get your coloration, where you get all this super blonde. Is stuff that's cut a little bit more prematurely.
For sure.
And then are there plants that are genetically prone to be high in these desirable cannabinoids?
Yes. Yeah, definitely, man. I've definitely talked about this.
Versus they all have. Let me sort of clarify my question because I think this would be helpful for people who are interested.
Yeah.
Is that all these the majority of these cannabis plants do all contain these same cannabinoids, right? They all have that in common. But are there some cultivars that are prone to be high in a desirable cannabinoid, like a CBN or a CBG, that plant is the one that you go to for the CBG.
Yeah.
Or, it's tends to be higher in those desirable cannabinoids.
Yes,
that does exist, doesn't it?
Yeah,
absolutely.
With solventless, with OGs, primarily OGs or those really earth toned strains have a really unique profile. There's in the terpene profile, there's usually a really high spike within that, and versus some other strains, will have a stronger CBGN profile. And
I know. So one of my other buddies just moved up to Mendocino and runs a large farm up there for Henry's Original. So big up Jason Arnold if he's listening. But
nice.
They're doing a lot of cool breeding stuff up there, and a lot of what they're talking about is, why are we doing these big CBD farms when CBD is a race to the bottom, really, at the end of the day? We can put up CBG farms, CBN farms, CBC farms, and it's really just a matter of finding the right cultivar that's high in these other ancillary cannabinoids, to your point. And so that's coming. I mean, it's definitely it's coming. And to tie that in with what Ronnie was talking about earlier in terms of being able to kind of dial in custom highs and ratios and things like that. I mean, if you think about where all of this is truly headed from a medical standpoint, I mean, that's definitely where it's going. Is it's going to say, eventually you'll be able to probably go to your doc and get a script for your endocannabinoid deficiency and he'll write you a script for, X amount of CBG, X amount of CBN, X amount of THC, blah, blah, blah. And they'll custom ratio it all out to what you need, just like they do with other pharmaceuticals.
Right. Like my blood pressure pill I take with 12.5 milligrams of lisinopril and 5 milligrams of hydrochlorothiazide.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah, man.
Yeah.
And when I don't take it, if I don't take that pill, things change dramatically. I have to take that pill.
Yeah.
And it's just basically the way I was born too, though it's not necessarily like because of my carelessness or unhealthy.
For sure.
I was born with a certain condition that it gives me high blood pressure.
Yeah.
And if I don't take those pills, I've seen the difference,
Yeah. Yeah, man.
And because I've tried to I'm going to live a healthy lifestyle and I'm not going to take that pill.
Yeah.
Right. And I've tried that too. And I had some pretty dramatic consequences.
Yeah.
So the future is out there for us to be able to dial in cannabis as medicine for all those reasons, for sure.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. And that's truly where my heart is at with the whole thing. I mean, I want to bring cannabis to as many people as possible and be a positive representative of the plant at all times.
Yeah.
That's really how I, ultimately fell in with all you guys. And ultimately how I found, all the Rastas in Denver and all the activists in Denver, way back when I first moved here in 2005. I was really fortunate to, one of the first people I met in town was Ken Gorman. Who was a big activist here in town.
Long live Ken Gorman.
Rest in peace.
Yeah, man.
And,
he
long live the
man.
name,
He was advocating forever, man.
Absolutely,
he was gladly receiving cannabis consumption tickets so that he could go to court and fight for the legalization of cannabis in a court of law.
Absolutely.
And he would encourage the police to write him a ticket so that he would get a court date or a day in court in front of a judge so that he could advocate cannabis in front of a court of law.
Yeah, he's one of the main organizers for the rally.
Absolutely.
Yeah, man.
For real.
Yeah.
I've been there with him on Sundays at 420 for many sessions when it got so big that there was even like a live band on the steps of the state capitol of Denver, Colorado, and they were handing out bongs.
Yep.
And police were there on horseback.
Yeah, I think
I was watching.
I think I was like maybe 11 or 12, and I was like, "What is going on?"
Ken
Watching
Gorman.
the news, and they're passing around bongs. I'm like, "Wow."
Yeah, dude, for sure. And and just very fortunate to fall in with those types of people in the very beginning and really find a passion for it. Dr. Robert Melamede was one of my mentors for quite some time. I was fortunate and blessed to know him through my time at UCCS. Graduated with a business degree from CU ultimately, but knew him. And so for those of you who don't know, Dr. Bob is a world-renowned cannabis science researcher on the endocannabinoid system, holds a lot of patents in DNA research and things like that. And ultimately, learned a lot about the plant and the power of the plant through Dr. Bob. And during my time at Rockbrook, we were actually able to partner with Cannabis Science when he was the head of Cannabis Science. And ultimately that was disbanded just because back then you couldn't be funded by a publicly traded company in Colorado, which is super ironic because that ban just got lifted earlier this year. And now big players like Columbia Care brought up Green Solution and so on and so forth. But this was back in 2010. And the state was like, no, you can't do that. But definitely big up Dr. Bob, who's retired on the East Coast right now. Big up,
Bob.
But just learned a wealth of information from him about the endocannabinoid system and how this all works and why cannabis is an effective medicine and why it works the way it does, and how you can really holistically apply this to your life in positive ways. You know, him obviously being he's the old chair of biology at UCCS, and so really smart, intelligent guy, but really taught me that you don't have to be a lazy stoner to enjoy cannabis. Like, you can use this at almost like, you know, as a drug that you can use to make your life better. Yeah. And it's something that I really was able to do with, like I had mentioned, my anxiety and things like that. Makes me a lot more functional in my day-to-day life, allows me to be more articulate in my day-to-day life. Whereas when I'm taking Xanax and things like that, I can't really funnel through all the fuzz to get out what I'm trying to say. Yeah. And so, you know, I've really found my way with cannabis, just being something that has been so beneficial to my life, not just through learning cultivation and consuming it personally, but just, I mean, the people that it's brought into my life, the opportunities it's brought into my life. You know, I can say I'm probably one of few people that gets to travel the world and share their knowledge of the plant, not only on a cultivation level, but on a retail level, on an extraction level, and just on a general subject matter expert level. Yeah. So I try to always stay very humbled in that and grounded in that, and always be a good representative of the plant at all times. So.
Yeah, definitely. Cannabis has opened up my appreciation to like all other different avenues, like agriculture. Yeah. Just meditation, being like hands-on plants and working, because it makes me think like sometimes when I'm in the garden, like, you know, what if I worked at a bonsai nursery and dealt with bonsais? You know what I mean? Sculpting and shaping, just thinking how much more involved and invested you are into plants. You know what I mean? Totally, man. It gives you it's a humbling feeling, and to just have that respect for life in full circle, you know.
I mean, and there was, I mean, you probably remember there was definite days in the garden where I was not happy at certain points in time, because as great of a job as it is, like it's not all sunshine and roses, you know. Yeah. And I had to kill the grow a few times and bring it back to life under new licenses and things like that, which is a really tough thing to do as a grower after you put all that time and love and everything into it, and then you just run it all through a wood chipper into a dumpster.
Yeah, I've seen that.
And we had a power failure. You know, my whole fresh 125 clones, all freshly cut, thriving when I left, were dead when I got back in the morning because the power failed. Yeah, man. And everything was turned off when I got there. You know, and like scenarios like that are crazy.
Oh yeah,
we just and I even reached out to Matt like, oh my God, you know, this is like my whole future, man. Like everything's all fucking dead. So yeah, man. Like it was horrible.
Yeah, no, it's devastating. We've had the power go out, and a whole like 1,000 plants.
Oh yeah,
humidity spiking into like 90%, and like PM spreading within seconds.
Oh yeah, man.
I mean, you know, it's definitely humbling, all the learning curves, you know, as far as growing goes, and all that stuff. You got to put in the work to really appreciate the plant, and that's what we were talking with Kez when Kez Namdi was here. The more I think about it, the more I believe what he said was right. Was why don't we have an event that honors the whole plant? Yeah. And all its components. Yeah, like man. Best in CBGN, best in CBD, best in, you know, all those platforms. And hopefully from what you're saying, that's what we're getting to, is to a point that, and I believe it too, the evolution of it, where we'll be able to isolate these things and really hopefully drive it home as medicine, where we're not focusing just on a cash crop of THC. Or you know.
Yeah,
CBD.
I mean, and unfortunately and fortunately, a lot of that is driven by market dynamics, and you know, the fact that, you know, we have everything in terms of the cannabis industry not being federally legal here in the U.S. You know, it doesn't allow us to be a leader in research when it comes to those types of things, but it does allow us to have a state-to-state market that is pretty focused on high THC plants. Which is great, and there's nothing wrong with that. But when it comes to, you know, the other people that are suffering, that could maybe end up with a, you know, blood pressure medication that is cannabis based or hemp based or something like that, we're not really doing them a lot of favors necessarily at the end of the day.
Well, we're secluding ourselves into a niche community where all we care about is THC and what's the next cookies cut, and all those things are so, you know, it's nice and all, but at the same time, like you're saying, we gotta be able to start using it for a better purpose.
Yeah. Well, and that's really where my viewpoint on, federal legalization in multiple countries as well, and really ultimately which stems into globalization at the end of the day, which is where all this is headed, right? It's like Canada already exports cannabis to like Germany, for example, for their medical patients. In Colombia, they export oil, cannabis oil, to other countries. And so, it's coming. And really what you have to do is you have to meet a threshold with your facility that it's GMP compliant, which means it meets good manufacturing practices. And as long as you're meeting those thresholds and you have a federally legal cannabis program in your country, you can export that as a commodity. And so I think once globalization happens, you'll be able to import cheap oil from south of the equator, and you'll be able to import, CBG driven plants from other regions of the world, right, and things like that. And I've always thought that, really long term, this kind of all goes the way of coffee, on a scalable level, at least, not talking about the craft growers and the boutique growers and things like that. But ultimately, I think it kind of goes the way of coffee, where like you have different regions of the world that produce different kinds of coffee that have certain, terroir, basically, to use a wine term, that's native to their soil, that's native to their area. You'll probably be able to get Durban poison that was grown in the Horn of South Africa at some point in time. You'll be able to get lamb's bread that was grown in Jamaica at some point in time, right, so on and so forth. And I think that that's really where a lot of this is headed, and a lot of people are starting to position themselves accordingly, where you see a lot of these large Canadian companies are in Europe, they're in Colombia, they're in these other places. They're now in the U.S. as well.
Africa for sure.
Exactly, man. I remember I think I hit you up a few years ago after I had lunch with the Crown Prince of an African nation.
Crown Prince of, I can't remember what it was. It was an interesting name.
Yeah, it was, and that's the whole thing. Is like, he pretty much was like, everybody who needs to create a cannabis program or stamp a cannabis program for our country is in this room right now, and like we can just get it done today. And so, but it's cool to see that they're now thinking outside the box for those types of things. They see the value in it, and they see not only the value in exporting it, but they see the medical value, because he was telling me how his people don't have, they don't have health care, they don't have a health program, they don't have things like that to really enrich their people's health. And so he was like, at least if we give them cannabis as medicine, we're giving them something, and we're providing them jobs, and we're giving them a chance. And and it really just starts there at the end of the day. And that's really my drive in this whole thing, right, is to just help bring that to whoever it is that needs it, and really help enrich them through that whole process. So
nice. Yeah, I appreciate you, brother. Definitely, I've gained a lot of knowledge and appreciation for the whole craft and the medical side of it. Dealing with people like you and blood pressure and when I'm doing hash with Native Roots, dealing with patients that come in and go, yo, I specifically need this micron because it helps me with my digestive system, and I have I'm on pain medication and I can't take anything else other.
Yeah, man.
And it really humbles you to realize that, like, hey, this is done right.
Yeah.
This can be effective, and for we can figure out the right things to help people.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's definitely humbling. And I was at Verde's Christmas party.
Nice.
I got an invite, and I went over, and it was funny because they had a whole house rented out, and it reminded me of Native Roots, of like how we used to do things. And so one of the guys who's like the he went from bud tender to wholesale guy, and now he's operating the wholesale thing. And he was like, oh, yeah, man, we're doing these parties now. I don't know if I told you. I was like, no, you didn't tell me. He goes, yeah, man, I'll have to give you the invite, so you can come. And it just reminded me of everything we used to do at Native Roots, and how ahead of the times we were. But I geeked out because I got into this conversation for like an hour with this kid who was probably like a nerdy kid, but he loved weed, you could tell. And like he seemed kind of socially awkward, but I just started talking to him, and we got to a point in the conversation where he made me realize that we are chasing a scent from a plant. basic, like the bugs, and so whatever's the environment of the plant, whatever's going on with it, it's constantly releasing different signals, you know. So at some point, there's a different profile to the terpene while it's releasing these signals, you know what I mean? So if there's a certain type of bug comes in, it releases these sensors, sensors go off, the plant's kind of sending off a different signal. And then different bug comes in, the plant reacts and sends off a different signal, right? And so while we come by, our big caveman self comes by and goes, that smells good. And we determine our representation of that plant off of that scent and what we saw at that particular moment. But this plant's constantly sending off different signals throughout its whole life, and we're like the caveman that just caught that one scent that's like, that's it, we're gonna run with that, you know. That's what it's the expectation is you're gonna be that. And I was in tears, bro. I was like, oh my God, we're chasing scents. Man. You know what I mean? We're that's how evolved we are. We're just running around chasing the scent of a plant.
Watch The Secret Life of Plants. If you ever wondered what if you ever had any inclination to know how smart a plant is, if it's listening to you or if it can communicate with you, watch that film and read that book. It's great, fascinating film about plants, Secret Life of Plants. Man, it's old school. It's like 1970s.
What was the one grower, Carver or Tarver? It was a grower who was like had a symbiotic. He believed plants were talking to him. I can't remember it. It was like the first black grow, one of the first black
plants can like emit. They can sense when there's a predator around them or when there's something that's a danger to them, and they can emit not just the cannabis plant but plants in general. They can emit like offensive odors that will make the bird that's going to come eat this thing off it may not want to eat the thing off it, you know. And it has like protective measures and can also attract things, you know, like not necessarily repel, but also attract
a certain type of bug that the other predator that they're trying to keep away. That bug, the predator doesn't like. It's like oh, hey, come hang out on me to keep this guy off my back. And no, plants are super alive and intelligent. I do believe we share a symbiotic relationship. I feel it. That's why
they're hairy. I mean, if you look at it under a microscope, not to interrupt you, but when you look under a microscope and examine, especially a cannabis plant, it has hair. It has, a dermis. It really is.
Oh yeah, the whole vascular system.
It's alive. You know, like plants are alive, just like we are.
For sure, man.
I know. Speaking of just educational stuff, there's another great ethnobotany cannabis book by Robert Clark that is just amazing, and it really is the evolution of cannabis alongside the evolution of humans, and really how that has been instrumental in, where we are today, and how cannabis, was moved in seed form through different parts of the Middle East and Africa, all the way into parts of Eastern Europe and then over to the US, and really how that's evolved to create all the different types of strains that we have today, indigenous to those areas of the world. So again, if you're looking for just some cool info on how humans have evolved right alongside the cannabis plant specifically, it's Ethnobotany and Cannabis by Robert C. Clark. So,
nice.
It's a great book. It's on my coffee table. So.
Nice.
Awesome.
Yeah, man. Yeah, all good things, my brother. Yeah, I'm super stoked to get you on, just to get this one on the book. Like I said, a great mentor to me, and someone that I've looked up to in the cannabis business, and that's continuing to put that positive energy out there, and that this is a medicine and treat it respectfully. That's I think that's super important in the industry, to have people like you that kind of keep that just honorable, you know what I mean, respectful, and appreciates the plant for what it is.
No, thank you, brother.
Yeah, man.
Yeah, it's a really important part of this that shouldn't be lost throughout the whole corporatization of cannabis. And what's going on right now through publicly traded companies and all that stuff it's bound to happen. It's the evolution of the industry, but you shouldn't lose track of where your roots are. And this was ultimately all built from a movement of people who were doing this when it wasn't cool. I mean, my pops has charges for cultivation from way back and can grow some pretty fire cannabis, but can't be in the industry today because of charges from 30 years ago.
Yeah, people we know that are the same way, that have
absolutely,
gotten a felony.
A lot of our brothers
were not able to enter the cannabis industry, but still have done great things outside of the industry itself.
Yeah, and just to recognize that this is a movement, and this is a culture, and it needs to be embraced not only through the grassroots but also through the big corporations. It's really important.
Yeah, and I think we called it, for those that have been around in the industry since its birth, as far as where we saw things going.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Yeah. Like some of those things that we predicted, like, it's going to be a boutique market. Cannabis is going to be like this, Budweiser versus champagne, and that type of thing is kind of really panned its way out to, that's what it is. Like we were talking about, like what dictates the market is even that breeding. To be able to do that, and Colorado getting established in that area where we're actually cultivating genetics out of here to feed the rest of the world is huge. You know what I mean? We're ahead of the curve, and it's it's all progression, man. I'm excited to be a part of it still, and I'm just trying to stay humble, not lose the passion. That's why I'm here with the podcast, is being able to put my energy into a different area. I work out and I try to stay busy with the kids and life in general, but I mean, I don't want to lose the passion for doing what I do. I even told the owner that I work with that's exactly what's going on. I was like, yeah, man, I know that podcasting doesn't pay my bills, but I'm super excited about it, and it makes me feel good, and to just have these conversations and I feel like I'm doing a service by having people like yourself on, man. And just like our last guest, Detour, to just tell people how they got to be where they're at, and that information will reach the right people. So
absolutely, man. I mean, I firmly believe that I was put on this planet to be a messenger of this plant, and that's what I'm going to do. I mean, again, thank you for the opportunity and the platform, the friendship, the love, for everything, man. Both you guys. It's man,
it's always been a pleasure, man.
Yeah, brother, for sure, man. It's been a long, crazy journey, but always blessed to still be a part of it. So
dope, man. Well, where can people find you if they want to, information, reach out?
You can look into Westleaf Cannabis, look into We Grow Cannabis, look into Prairie Records, and then my consulting firm is Chi Consulting Group, so you can find me at chiconsultinggroup.com. If you have anything else you want to discuss. So
nice. Yeah, and that's anything from retail to scaling up to build out to extractions to cultivation. I think you're well versed in all those areas. So
man.
To be sure to check the negooseorderco.com. Where you can check out the Rasta rolling papers. I do have some merch up as far as t-shirts, Idle Med shirts, Nagoose Order CO shirts. I'm going to be putting the Rasta Ronnie shirts up here soon. High grade specialists, but you can definitely check those rolling papers there. Shout out to some of our semi-sponsors, Verde Dispensary, Peak Dispensary, as well as 75 Farms. Please sure check out my man Blood Pressure.
Yes,
twice every month. What are those dates?
Yes, right here on KGNU. Wednesdays, 10 p.m. to 12 Mountain Time. Sundays, 10 p.m. to 12. And on second Sundays, we're over at the Meadowlark.
Yes, and so this is Where the Crown Podcast. Be sure to like, subscribe, comment, and review. Give us a good review, please, if you think so, and that way we can keep pushing this to the top of all those platforms, so we can keep doing this. So give thanks and praise to the Most High, Jah Rastafari.
Rastafari.
Yeah, man.